Captain Daniel Hayes adjusted the strap of his pack as the landing craft settled onto the frozen plain. The ground outside was a sheet of white stretching to the horizon, broken only by jagged ridges of dark stone. The cold of this alien world pressed even through the ship's reinforced hull, and Daniel could almost feel the frost in his bones before he stepped outside. He had been on many missions before, but something about this place felt heavier, as though the air itself carried the weight of history. He glanced around at the others inside the craft. Representatives from 5 species were part of the expedition. They had all come to this planet, Thalora, to discuss the possibility of peace between rival factions. Daniel was the only human, chosen because of his reputation for calm words and his ability to connect with people from very different backgrounds. Yet even with his experience, he felt out of place. The other species had long histories of conflict and tradition, while humans were still new to the galactic stage. He knew that every word he spoke would be measured twice and every action judged. Among the group stood Princess Kalira. She was taller than most of the others, with long braids of silver-black hair and eyes like molten gold. Her people were known as the Vayari, proud warriors with a culture built on honor. They rarely spoke without purpose, and they held themselves with a calm strength that made others cautious. Daniel had tried to speak to her during the voyage, but she had answered in few words, her tone polite yet distant. He had not taken offense. He knew some cultures valued silence more than conversation. Still, he felt her gaze often, as though she was weighing something unseen. The ramp lowered, and a blast of icy wind roared into the craft. Daniel braced himself and followed the others out into the storm. The snow was fine and sharp, stinging his cheeks as it rushed across the plain. The sky above was a swirl of gray, heavy with clouds that blotted out the sun. Each breath felt like knives in his lungs. He pulled his coat tighter and kept his step steady, refusing to show weakness in front of the others. Their goal was to reach a temporary base where talks could begin. It was only a few kilometers away, but the weather had turned suddenly. The snow thickened until shapes just a few meters ahead became blurred. The wind howled louder, carrying the voice of the storm. One of the envoys from another species shouted something about shelter, but the words were nearly lost in the gale. The leader of the group signaled, and they moved toward a cluster of dark rocks jutting out of the ice. The rocks offered some relief, but it was not enough. The storm was worsening by the minute, and traveling further could be deadly. Emergency shelters were pulled from their packs, compact tents designed to withstand extreme conditions. There were fewer tents than people since they were meant to be shared. Daniel unrolled one and prepared to set it up, his fingers stiff with cold. Before he could ask who would join him, Kalira stepped forward. Without a word, she held one side of the material and helped him secure it against the rocks. Together they anchored the tent until it stood firm against the wind. Daniel was surprised. He had expected her to choose one of her own kind, or perhaps the elders of her people, but instead she had silently chosen to share space with him. He gave her a small nod of thanks, though she did not answer, her golden eyes unreadable. Inside the tent, the sound of the storm became a low roar, muffled by the thick walls. The air was still cold, but it was better than outside. Daniel removed his gloves and rubbed his hands together, trying to bring back warmth. Kalira sat cross-legged across from him, her posture straight, her face calm. The space was tight, and he could feel her presence filling the air around him. He cleared his throat, trying to break the silence. "Quite a storm out there," he said with a half-smile. She tilted her head slightly but said nothing. Her people did not waste words on the obvious. Daniel tried again, speaking of the mission, of the importance of peace, of how much it could change for everyone. She listened, her expression never shifting, but her eyes remained fixed on him. He wondered if she thought him foolish for speaking so much. Humans hated silence, but maybe she found comfort in it. As the hours passed, the cold grew sharper. Daniel pulled out a thermal blanket from his pack. He noticed that even Kalira, who seemed unshakable, had begun to shiver faintly. Without hesitation, he unfolded the blanket and offered it to her. She looked at it, then at him, and after a pause accepted. To his surprise, instead of wrapping it around herself alone, she shifted closer so that they both could share the warmth. Daniel felt the closeness but said nothing. He assumed it was a practical decision, survival in the storm. Yet deep inside he felt something stir. He had no way of knowing that for her, this night would mean more than he could imagine. The storm outside raged with no mercy. The tent shook as the wind slammed against it, and the sound was like waves crashing against rocks. Daniel sat with his back against the wall of the shelter, listening to the endless roar. Every few moments he wondered if the fabric would tear and leave them both at the mercy of the blizzard. But the tent held firm, and inside there was at least some comfort. Kalira sat across from him, calm as if the storm meant nothing. Her golden eyes glowed faintly in the dim light of the emergency lamp. Daniel wondered how she managed to look so composed. He knew the cold was reaching her as much as it was him. She was no different from anyone else when it came to the body's limits, yet her face showed no sign of discomfort, no complaint, no fear. He tried again to make conversation. "Do storms like this happen often here?" he asked, though he knew her people were not from Thalora. For a long time she did not reply. Then in her soft, careful voice she said, "This world is unkind. The storm has spirit. It watches." Her words made Daniel blink. He wondered if she was speaking literally or if it was just a way of describing nature. Humans often used poetic language too, but with her people, it was hard to know what was tradition and what was truth. "That's an interesting way to put it," Daniel said, smiling lightly. "On Earth, we also say the weather has moods. Like a storm is angry or the sun is kind." Kalira studied him in silence as though measuring the weight of his response. He was beginning to grow used to her long pauses. Where humans rushed to fill the air, she seemed to value each word as though it mattered greatly. Time dragged slowly inside the tent. Daniel could feel the chill trying to slip past the blanket he had shared. The warmth between them kept the worst of it away, but his body still ached from the cold. He glanced at her again. Her shoulders were close to his, closer than he had ever expected. For someone of her proud race, this closeness seemed unusual. He reminded himself not to misinterpret. It was survival, nothing more. To keep himself awake, he spoke again. "You know, when I was a boy, I used to camp out in the forest with my friends. We'd bring tents like this, though not as strong. Sometimes storms would come at night, and we'd all hide inside and pretend we weren't scared." He gave a small laugh, shaking his head. "I guess some things don't change, even out here." Kalira tilted her head, her golden braids brushing against her shoulder. "You speak freely," she said at last. "You tell stories to push away the cold." "That's what humans do," Daniel admitted. "We talk, we share. It makes us feel less alone." Her eyes softened, though her expression remained unreadable. "Strange," she murmured, but not unpleasant. For Daniel, those few words were a victory. He felt the weight of her voice, the hint that perhaps she did not mind his chatter after all. It gave him a spark of hope that maybe through time she would open up more. The hours stretched on. Outside, the storm grew fiercer, like a living beast trying to claw its way inside. Snow pressed against the walls of the tent, making it creak under the strain. Daniel reached out once to steady the pole, fearing it might break. Kalira placed her hand over his for a moment, steady and firm. "It will hold," she said simply. And something in her calm tone made him believe her. As night deepened, fatigue pulled at them both. The temperature dropped further, and Daniel could feel his body slowing. He pulled the blanket tighter, but it wasn't enough. Kalira shifted closer until their shoulders touched, and then, without a word, she spread part of her cloak over both of them. The warmth grew stronger. Daniel's heart raced at the sudden closeness, but he forced himself to stay calm. It was survival, he reminded himself again. Just survival. The silence stretched, but it no longer felt heavy. Instead, it was filled with the sound of the storm outside, the steady breathing of two people waiting for dawn, and the quiet bond of shared endurance. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, only to open them again when Kalira spoke softly in her own tongue. The words rolled from her lips like music, low and steady. The translator on his wrist blinked but did not fully capture the meaning. Only a few words appeared on the small screen. Vow, storm, chosen. The rest was lost in distortion. Daniel frowned, puzzled. He looked at her, but she had already fallen silent again. Her gaze lowered as though she had said something not meant for translation. "What was that?" he asked carefully. Kalira did not answer. Instead, she closed her eyes, her expression calm as if her words had been final. Daniel sighed, shaking his head with a quiet laugh. "One day you'll have to teach me your language. This translator never seems to get it right." Still, there was no reply. Only the storm's endless voice filled the night, and the warmth of their shared shelter wrapped around them. Daniel leaned back against the tent wall, his thoughts drifting. He wondered what secrets her people carried, and what meaning her words might have held. But for now, it was enough that they were safe, together, waiting for the dawn to come. The storm outside had not weakened through the long hours of the night. The tent quivered with each blast of wind, and snow piled higher against its walls. Daniel stirred in his half-sleep, his body sore from the cold floor, though the blanket and Kalira's cloak had kept him alive through the freezing dark. His eyes opened when he heard a low sound, a voice carried softly above the storm. Kalira was speaking again in her own tongue. Her words were quiet, almost like a chant flowing with rhythm. Daniel turned slightly to listen. The translator on his wrist blinked, trying to catch the meaning, but it struggled with the structure of her language. Only a few words appeared again: bond, storm, claim. Daniel frowned, confused. He watched her lips move, saw the calm certainty in her face, and wondered what she was saying. When she finished, Kalira looked at him with steady eyes. Her hand moved slightly, brushing against his arm. It was a light touch, nothing more than a moment of contact, yet her gaze lingered as though she expected an answer. Daniel gave her a small smile, not wanting to seem rude. "I don't understand, but I'll take that as something good," he said softly. "Maybe a prayer? Or a story?" Kalira's face remained calm. She leaned back, folding her hands over her knees, and did not reply. Daniel thought she might be disappointed, but she showed no sign of emotion. He assumed he had simply misunderstood. Humans often did not catch the deeper meanings of other cultures. Perhaps she was speaking to the storm or to her ancestors. It was not for him to judge. The hours passed slowly. The storm continued its roar, but inside the tent there was a stillness between them. Daniel found himself studying Kalira's features, the sharp lines of her cheekbones, the silver-black strands of her braids, the way her golden eyes caught even the dim light. She seemed carved from strength itself, yet there was something softer beneath that he could not name. To distract himself, Daniel began talking again. He told her about Earth's oceans, wide and endless, where storms also had voices. He spoke about how humans built ships to cross those waters, even when the waves tried to throw them back. "We've always moved forward, no matter how strong the storm," he said, his voice thoughtful. Kalira's gaze never left him. When he finished, she spoke in the common tongue with slow care. "You fight storms with wooden sails. We fight storms with silence." But both survive. Daniel smiled at that. It was one of the longest things she had said to him, and it felt like a bridge between them. "I guess survival is a language we all share." Later, as night deepened, Kalira shifted closer again, the warmth of her presence keeping the cold from overwhelming them. Daniel felt her shoulder touch his, and though he wanted to ask if it was allowed in her culture, he kept quiet. He did not want to break the fragile comfort they had built. At one point, he dozed, only to wake when he felt her voice again. Her words came in the same gentle rhythm as before, like a vow whispered to the storm. The translator sparked faintly but could not catch the full meaning. It offered only fragments: bound, witness, chosen. Daniel rubbed his face and gave a tired laugh. "This thing really needs better software," he muttered, tapping the device. Kalira said nothing. Instead, she lowered her head slightly, as though acknowledging something final had been spoken. She looked at him with eyes that carried quiet certainty, then closed them, resting without another word. Daniel leaned back, puzzled. He tried to make sense of it. Was it part of her culture to speak to the storm? Did she believe the storm listened and judged? Perhaps she was honoring her people's traditions in the face of danger. Whatever it was, he respected it. Even if he could not understand, he knew it mattered to her. What he did not know was that her words were no simple prayer. Among the Veyari, a vow spoken in the heart of the storm was sacred. It was a claim, a binding of spirits witnessed by the storm itself. By touching his arm after speaking, she had sealed her intent. She had declared him her chosen bondmate, her claim under the eyes of nature. And because he had not denied her, because he had responded with acceptance in his own way, the vow was set. Daniel, however, sat in ignorance, humming softly to himself to fight the silence. He thought she had simply been passing time with chants or rituals. To him, it was just another mystery in the long list of alien traditions he had yet to learn. He promised himself that when the mission was done, He would ask her to teach him the meaning of her language properly. For now it was enough that they were safe in the tent, alive through the storm. As the night went on, his mind drifted between wakefulness and sleep. Kalira remained beside him, steady and silent as though keeping watch. Each time he opened his eyes, her calm figure was still there, unshaken by the storm. He felt strangely reassured, as though nothing could touch him while she sat nearby. In the dead of night, as the blizzard howled and the world outside vanished under snow, a bond had been declared. Daniel did not yet realize that his life had changed in that moment, that her words carried a promise he had unknowingly accepted. For him, it was just another night of survival. For her, it was the night she had claimed him under the storm's witness. The storm finally began to fade when the first light of dawn touched the frozen plain. The howling winds weakened to a low moan, and the tent stopped trembling under the weight of the snow. Daniel stirred awake, stiff and sore, his breath forming small clouds in the chilled air. For a moment he thought he was still dreaming, because the silence inside felt so strange after a night of endless noise. Kalira was already awake, sitting upright with the same calm posture she had carried through the night. Her golden eyes glowed faintly in the morning light that seeped through the thin walls of the tent. She looked as steady as ever, though Daniel could see the faint lines of weariness on her face. She had endured the storm without complaint, just as she had endured every moment since they landed. Daniel stretched, pulling the blanket back over his shoulders. "We made it," he said softly, his voice rough from the cold air. "Honestly, I wasn't sure this tent would last. Guess it's stronger than it looks." Kalira gave a small nod. "The storm is finished. We walk soon." There was no hesitation in her voice, no relief either, just calm certainty. Daniel admired that about her. She was like a rock standing against waves, never moving no matter how hard the storm crashed. He wondered if her people were all like her, or if she carried even greater strength because of who she was. When they stepped outside, the plain had changed completely. The snow was piled high, covering their footprints from the night before. The jagged rocks stood like black teeth above the white blanket, and the horizon was clearer now that the clouds had begun to break. Pale sunlight glowed weakly, reflecting off the endless frost. It was still bitterly cold, but the storm's fury had passed. The other envoys emerged from their shelters one by one, brushing snow off their shoulders and speaking in hushed voices. Some looked exhausted, others relieved. Daniel caught a few glances aimed at him and Kalira, though he couldn't tell what they meant. Perhaps they were simply curious about who had shared tents with whom. He thought little of it and focused on preparing his gear. Kalira stood at his side, closer than before. There was something different in the way she carried herself now. Her eyes, though still steady, held a faint softness when they turned toward him. Daniel noticed, but assumed it was only because they had survived a dangerous night together. Shared hardship often created unspoken respect, he reasoned. As the group began to move across the snowy plain toward the base, Daniel walked beside Kalira. The silence stretched between them, but it no longer felt cold. He found himself content simply matching his steps to hers. When the wind picked up slightly, Kalira shifted her cloak so that part of it shielded him as well. He gave her a small smile. "Thanks. I'd probably be frozen by now if not for you." "You offered the blanket," she replied, her voice even. "I returned the balance," Daniel chuckled. "Fair trade then." When they reached the base camp, small prefabricated shelters were already standing against the ice. Heat lamps glowed faintly inside, offering welcome warmth. Daniel stepped into the main hall, grateful for the change in temperature. Around him, envoys gathered at long tables, speaking quietly about the coming negotiations. But again, Daniel felt the eyes of others turning toward him and Kalira. Some whispered in their own languages, their tones carrying curiosity and surprise. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "What's with everyone staring?" he murmured under his breath. Kalira did not answer. She walked forward with calm dignity, her head held high. When one of her own advisors approached and bowed slightly, their gaze flicked to Daniel before they withdrew. Daniel caught the glance and frowned. He didn't understand what was happening, but he brushed it off, thinking it must be about politics he wasn't yet aware of. During the first round of talks, Daniel sat at the long table and listened as different species presented their concerns. The air was heavy with tension. Old grudges, old wounds, and suspicion filled the hall. When it was his turn to speak, Daniel offered ideas for shared trade routes and neutral zones. He spoke carefully, trying to find words that bridged gaps instead of widening them. To his surprise, Kalira spoke up in his defense. When one envoy questioned his proposal, she interrupted, her voice strong and certain. The human speaks with reason. His plan brings balance. It should be considered. The hall fell silent for a moment. Daniel blinked, surprised. He hadn't expected her to support him so openly. Her people were known for pride, for rarely bending to the words of outsiders. Yet here she was, standing beside him with absolute certainty. He gave her a small nod of thanks, whispering, "I appreciate that." Kalira only inclined her head, as if it was natural. But around the hall murmurs began again. Daniel could not understand why the others reacted with such intensity. To him it was just support from an ally. To them it was something far greater. As the meeting ended, Daniel stepped outside into the crisp air. He rubbed his hands together, trying to think of strategies for the next round. Kalira joined him, her presence steady as ever. "You defended me in there," Daniel said softly. "You didn't have to." Her eyes met his, golden and calm. "I did not defend. I stood with you." Daniel smiled, though he still did not grasp the depth of her words. To him it was simple respect earned through the storm. To her it was the duty of a vow already made. As the sun dipped low over the frozen horizon, Daniel still had no idea that the whispers following him were not about politics or curiosity. They were about a claim made in the storm, a bond that to Kalira's people was already sacred. To her his life was no longer just his own, it was tied to hers. But Daniel remained unaware, walking into the days ahead with only the faint sense that something had changed between them. The days that followed the storm were filled with long hours of discussion inside the base camp. The leaders of each species gathered around the long tables, voices sharp and heavy with years of mistrust. Every word carried the weight of history, and every suggestion was met with doubt. Daniel quickly realized that peace was not going to be won by clever speeches alone. The smallest detail could spark old anger, and he needed to tread carefully. Yet something strange began to happen during the meetings. Whenever Daniel spoke, Kalira gave him her full attention. If another envoy tried to dismiss his ideas, she often stepped in to reinforce his words. She did not shout or argue. Her voice was steady, her tone full of certainty, and because she was who she was, the air of a warrior race respected even by their rivals, her support carried heavy influence. Daniel at first thought it was coincidence. He assumed she found his ideas useful and happened to agree. But as the days passed, he noticed a pattern. No matter what he suggested, Kalira stood with him. It puzzled him, because he knew humans were still considered new and untested on the galactic stage. Why would a princess of such high standing put her weight behind him so strongly? The other envoys noticed as well. Whispers spread through the hall whenever Kalira spoke in his favor. Some looked uneasy, others curious, and a few seemed openly suspicious. Daniel felt their eyes following him, but he pretended not to notice. He was focused on the mission, not the rumors. One evening, after a long debate about territory rights, Daniel stepped outside to clear his head. The frozen air bit at his skin, but the quiet was a welcome change from the tense voices inside. He stared across the plain, the horizon painted in fading gold as the sun sank low. Kalira joined him without a word. She stood beside him, tall and silent, her cloak moving gently in the wind. For a while neither spoke. The only sound was the soft crunch of snow beneath their boots. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. "I think we're making progress, but it feels fragile. Like one wrong step could bring it all crashing down." Kalira's golden eyes turned toward him. "Fragile things must be guarded." Daniel gave a small laugh. "True enough. But I didn't expect you to be my guard in there. You've supported me every step. I don't know why, but I'm grateful." Her gaze lingered on him, steady and unreadable. "You stood with me in the storm," she said simply. Daniel tilted his head, puzzled. "We didn't have a choice. We shared a tent. It was survival." Her expression did not change. "Survival can become more." Daniel chuckled softly, assuming she was speaking of trust. "I suppose so. Hardship does make allies out of strangers." He left it at that, still not understanding her deeper meaning. Back in the hall, the political pressure continued to build. A rival warlord named Vedran grew impatient with the talks. He was known for his sharp tongue and his distrust of humans. Several times he questioned why Daniel's words were given so much weight. Why should the voice of a species so young be treated as equal to ours? Vedran demanded one afternoon, his tone full of scorn. Before Daniel could respond, Kalira spoke. Because his voice carries balance, because his vision is not clouded by old hatred. The hall fell silent. Daniel felt every eye turn toward them. Vedran's gaze narrowed and he gave a harsh laugh. Strange. The princess of the Veyari, who has never bent for anyone, bends now for a human. What spell has he cast on you? Kalira did not flinch. No spell, truth. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, wishing the ground would swallow him. He had no idea what deeper message Kalira was giving, but he could feel the weight in her words. To her people, they were not small. To him, they felt like a storm he did not understand. After the meeting, Daniel sat alone in his quarters, his thoughts restless. He replayed the moments in his head, the way Kalira defended him, the whispers in the hall, the way others looked at them with suspicion. He could not shake the feeling that something important had happened in the tent during the storm, something he had missed. He remembered her strange words, the ones the translator had failed to capture. Words like vow, bond, chosen. He rubbed his temples, sighing. What did you say that night, Kalira? He muttered to himself. The door opened softly and she stepped inside. Daniel looked up in surprise. She stood there, tall and calm, her cloak brushing the floor. For a moment she said nothing, just watched him with steady eyes. You doubt, she said at last. Daniel hesitated. I don't understand, that's all. You've been supporting me in every meeting. Everyone notices. They're starting to ask questions. Kalira's gaze did not waver. Let them ask. Her certainty both comforted and confused him. He wanted to press further, to demand answers, but something in her presence held him back. It felt like pushing against a mountain. Instead, he exhaled slowly. I don't know what I did to earn your trust, but I'll try to live up to it. That's all I can promise. Kalira inclined her head slightly as though accepting his words. But deep inside, she knew he had already promised far more than he realized. The vow spoken in the storm bound them, whether he understood it or not. Her people would not see his actions as chance. They would see them as fate. And as Daniel lay awake that night, still puzzling over her strange loyalty, the camp around them whispered louder. Rumors spread like sparks on dry grass, and the unseen consequences of that storm-bound vow were already shaping the path ahead. The morning sun rose weakly over the icy plains, painting the sky with a pale light. Inside the camp, the talks grew louder and harsher. The fragile peace that Daniel and Kalira tried to build was cracking under pressure. Warlord Vedran's voice dominated the hall, his words sharp and mocking. He questioned every proposal and his followers cheered him on. Daniel sat at the table, his hands folded, listening. He knew that if something didn't change soon, the entire peace summit would collapse. He searched for the right words to calm the storm, but before he could speak, Vedran slammed his fist down. This is a waste of time, Vedran shouted. Why should we trust old enemies? And why should we follow a human who barely knows our history? Tell me, Kalira, why do you defend him at every turn? What bond ties you to this outsider? The hall grew silent. Every pair of eyes turned toward Kalira. Even Daniel's breath caught in his throat. Kalira rose slowly from her seat. Her tall form cast a long shadow across the floor. She looked at Vedran, unshaken by his anger, then turned to the others. Her golden eyes glowed with calm certainty. You ask what bond ties me to him, she said, her voice firm. The answer is simple. In the night of the storm, I spoke the words of claim. I gave my vow. By the law of my people, he is bound to me and I to him. The hall erupted into noise. Gasps, shouts, and laughter filled the air. Some Foys leaned forward in disbelief. Others exchanged quick whispers. Daniel sat frozen. He felt as if the ground had shifted beneath his feet. Claim, vow, bound? The words rang in his head, but their meaning escaped him. Vedran's eyes gleamed with cruel amusement. So it is true. The proud princess of the Veyari has tied herself to a human. Tell me, Daniel, did you even know what she was claiming that night? Or were you too blind to see? Daniel swallowed hard. His mouth was dry and his thoughts spun. He stood slowly facing the hall. I don't know what she means, he admitted honestly. That night the translator failed. I thought she was only speaking of survival, of trust between strangers. The envoys erupted again, some laughing, some outraged. Kailira raised her hand and silence fell once more. "He speaks the truth," she said. He did not understand the words. "But that does not break the vow. It binds still. The vow is not undone by ignorance." Daniel turned to her, his voice low, almost pleading.
Kailira.
"What did you say that night? What did you bind me to?" Her eyes softened slightly as she looked at him. "I bound you to my side. I named you chosen. It is more than alliance, more than friendship. It is a vow of life." The weight of her words struck Daniel like a wave. He realized now why she had stood by him so fiercely, why she defended him against all doubt. To her, their bond was not strategy. It was law, it was sacred, it was fate. Vedran laughed loudly, the sound echoing through the chamber. "So the human is too weak even to know when he has been claimed. Tell me, Daniel, will you honor her vow, or will you shame her before us all by rejecting it?" The hall fell quiet again, waiting. Every face turned toward Daniel, the outsider who had somehow become the center of it all. Daniel's heart pounded. He thought of the storm, the tent, the strange words he had dismissed as a language gap. He thought of Kailira standing beside him every time he spoke, never letting him face doubt alone. She had chosen him, and even if he had not understood, he could see the truth in her eyes now. Slowly he lifted his head. "I did not understand the vow when it was spoken," he said, his voice steady. "But I know what loyalty means. I know what it means to stand beside someone when the storm rages. If Kailira has given her vow to me, then I will not reject it. I will honor it." The hall stirred with new whispers. Some looked surprised, others grudgingly impressed. Kailira's eyes shone as she inclined her head, a gesture of respect. For the first time since the storm, Daniel thought he saw something more than calm certainty in her face. It was pride. Vedran, however, sneered. "Then the human binds himself to her fate. Very well, but remember this, Daniel. If she falls, so do you. If she is challenged, you are challenged too. Do you have the strength to carry such a burden?" Daniel did not look away. "We'll find out." The words struck the hall with force. For a moment, silence reigned. Then slowly, one of the envoys from a neutral world stood. "If the princess has chosen the human and the human accepts, then we must respect their bond. Let the talks continue." Others nodded reluctantly, though Vedran's glare did not fade. That night, Daniel sat alone again, staring at the faint light of the campfires outside. He felt the weight of what had happened pressing down on him. He was no longer just a representative of Earth. He was tied to Kailira in a way deeper than he had ever imagined. She entered his quarters quietly, as she often did. For a long moment she said nothing, simply watching him. Finally she spoke. "You accepted?" Daniel nodded slowly. "I couldn't do anything else. You've stood with me since that night. I won't betray that." Her gaze softened, and for the first time he thought he saw the hint of a smile. Then the storm chose well. Daniel let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Whatever storms still waited ahead, he knew one thing now with certainty. He was not facing them alone. The days after Kailira's vow became known were heavy with tension. The camp was no longer only a place of negotiations, it was a place of rumors, of whispers that spread from tent to tent. Some envoys supported the bond between the Veari princess and the human. Others doubted it, saying it was a mistake that would end in disaster. And some, like Warlord Vedran, seemed eager to turn that bond into a weapon against them both. Daniel felt the weight of every stare. He had come as a representative of Earth, hoping to help build peace. But now he stood at the center of something much larger. He was bound to Kailira, not only in her people's eyes but also in his own heart. He could not walk away from it anymore. On the 5th night after the vow was revealed, a challenge was issued. Vedran stood before the gathering, his voice booming. "The human has accepted the bond. Then let him prove his worth. By ancient law, a vow such as theirs must be tested in trial. If he fails, the bond is void. If he falls, so does she. Will you face it, Daniel of Earth?" The hall erupted into noise. Some envoys protested, others shouted in agreement. Kailira rose to her feet, her voice steady.
"He does not stand alone."
"If there is a trial, then I face it with him," Vedran sneered. "Then let the two of you face what no single warrior has defeated. Survive and your bond will be honored. Fail, and both your names will be forgotten." Daniel felt the eyes of everyone on him. His chest tightened, but he forced his voice to remain calm. "If this is your law, then we will face it. Together. The trial was set for the next day. The arena was carved into the frozen ground, its high walls surrounding a wide circle. The sky above was gray and the cold air stung their skin. Around the arena the envoys gathered, their voices hushed with anticipation. Daniel stood at Kalira's side, his heart pounding in his chest. He had trained as a soldier before joining the diplomatic corps, but this was no ordinary mission. This was survival before the eyes of countless worlds. When the gates opened, a beast stepped into the arena. Its massive form moved with a slow, heavy grace. Thick scales covered its body, and its eyes glowed with a cold hunger. It was a trial beast bred for one purpose: to test those who claimed strength. Daniel tightened his grip on the spear he had been given. "No pressure, right?" he muttered under his breath. Kalira glanced at him, her golden eyes shining. "Storms do not bow to fear. We face it and we endure." The beast roared, shaking the ground, then charged. Daniel and Kalira moved together, their steps in sync. She was faster, her blade flashing as she struck at the beast's side. Daniel followed, jabbing his spear to drive it back. The creature snapped its jaws, forcing them to scatter. The crowd shouted, their voices echoing across the arena. Some cheered for the beast, others for the pair fighting it. Daniel's breath came heavy, but he pushed forward. He remembered Kalira's words, survival could become more. He realized then that their fight was not just for life. It was for the bond they had shared since that stormy night. The beast swung its tail, slamming Daniel to the ground. Pain shot through his chest. But before the creature could strike again, Kalira leapt between them, her blade cutting deep into its scaled hide. The beast roared in fury, turning its attention to her. Daniel forced himself to his feet, his vision blurred. He could not let her face it alone. With a shout he charged, driving his spear into the beast's throat. Kalira struck at the same moment, her blade piercing its chest. The beast gave one last roar, then collapsed, shaking the ground as it fell. For a moment, silence hung over the arena. Then the crowd erupted in cheers. Even those who doubted them could not deny what they had seen. Together, Human and Veari had faced the trial and triumphed. Daniel stood, his body aching, his breath ragged. Kalira stepped beside him, her blade dripping with the beast's blood. Their eyes met, and without words they knew. They had proven themselves not only to the crowd, but to each other. Phaedron's face twisted in frustration, but even he could not deny the result. He raised his hand grudgingly. "The trial is complete. The bond stands." The words echoed through the arena, sealing what had begun in the storm. That night the camp was quieter. The envoys spoke with less suspicion, and more with curiosity, even respect. For the first time, Daniel felt the fragile threads of peace beginning to hold. He knew the path ahead would still be difficult, but something had changed. The bond had given more than survival. It had given hope. Inside his tent, Daniel sat with Kalira. The fire between them flickered softly, casting warm light across their faces. He looked at her, still trying to understand how fate had led him here. "You claimed me without my knowing," he said quietly, "and now I've chosen to stay. Funny how storms decide our lives." Kalira's eyes softened, her voice calm. "Storms do not decide. They reveal. And what they revealed that night is true still. You and I stand together." Daniel smiled faintly, feeling the truth of her words. For the first time, he no longer felt like an outsider in this world of stars and warriors. He was bound, not by accident, but by choice. And as the night grew quiet, with only the wind whispering outside, Daniel knew one thing with certainty. The storm that had once threatened his life had given him something far greater. A bond unbreakable, a partner unshaken, and a future that no enemy could take away.